Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Melora, which is episode 6 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the second season episode, Melora. So Melora is the episode where a crew member comes on to the station to do a scientific survey. This crew member is from a planet that has a low gravity, so she is basically disabled in what most humanoids consider normal gravity. And this Cardassian space station apparently is not very conducive to her the equipment she usually uses to walk around, so she is reliant on a wheelchair. Dax and Bashir go out of their way to accommodate her and make sure all her needs are met. However, she does not like to be pitied and does not like to be patronized, and so is a little hostile and a little sensitive to the way that she is treated, when I do believe Cisco and Dax are doing their best to treat her like they would treat any other crew member. Meanwhile, there's a subplot about Quark having this old person that he sent to prison 8 years ago because they were in a job together, and Quark sold him out, and so he's come back to kill Quark, and he makes all these threats, and eventually these two plots collide when he takes Melora hostage. Melora and Dax on the runabout hostage along with Quark in an attempt to escape, and he thinks that he kills Melora, but in fact she's still alive, and uses the low G to escape. And yeah, by the way, there's a romance plot with Bashir, who's her doctor, and they have a romance, and he's giving her these treatments to try to get her to walk in what they consider normal gravity, but in doing so she would use the ability to do her low gravities because that would mess with their system. And it's these treatments that make her survive the phaser blast, but at the end she decides not to go through with the treatments because she doesn't want to lose who she is, and she parts with Julian on good terms as she leaves the station. So, first important note about this episode is that this character, Melora, I want to call her Pavlova. That's a New Zealand dessert. Pavlar, I think her name is. Melora Pavlar. Anyway, she was supposed to be a main cast member. In fact, to me, this wasn't a tidbit. To me, this wasn't a piece of trivia I looked up decades later. It's something I knew before I saw this episode. Because, not to sound too hipsterish, I'm just being honest, but before Deep Space Nine came out, I read an article. I think it was Entertainment Weekly, not TV Guide. I think it was an Entertainment Weekly that had a huge article about the new Star Trek show that was coming out, and people were fascinated by it, and had like very preliminary before they really started filming. So they had pictures, but they didn't show much. So you could see Morn and a few other like background aliens and like the promenade and stuff like that. But I don't think any of the main characters had been cast yet, or if they had, they hadn't really had pictures or anything about them. So it was a really early article, and they list all the main characters that were going to be in the show. Commander Cisco and his son Jake, Odo, the gruff security shapeshifter, and I don't even think they mentioned Dr. Bashir. Definitely mentioned Chief O'Brien, Major Kira, and the science officer would be a character from a planet with low gravity who had to be in a wheelchair because the gravity of normal gravity was too crushing for her. In other words, Melora. And so when I saw the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine, Emissary, I kept looking for this character. I'm like, where's the character in the wheelchair with low gravity? And instead, I saw Trill. I'm like, they got a Trill on board? What? When does this happen? So this was what I was expecting from the pilot episode, because I read that article in Entertainment Weekly. Little did I know that they decided to nix that character, although I did figure that out, obviously. But they decided to nix that character because they figured that it would be too expensive to always have her going in low gravity. I mean, which is fair, because they already have the shapeshifter character who's already going to be super expensive, so they don't want to have two really expensive characters. And so she was replaced with Dax, with the character of Jadzia Dax, and this might be part of the reason why Terry Farrell was the last actor to be cast, or Dax was the last role of the main characters to be cast. Could be that they changed this kind of last minute. I mean, it had to be fairly last minute if I read it in an article and I was expecting to see her in the pilot episode. So, a year later when season 2 comes out and this episode comes out, I'm like, oh! So they finally decided to do that character that the Entertainment Weekly told me, but lied to me and told me was going to be a main cast member. And so, yeah, for me, and again, not to sound hipsterish, it's just my personal experience. I knew this coming into the episode, that they were making up for this character that was originally supposed to be on the show. And also, she was meant to be a recurring character after this episode, but that obviously didn't happen. Probably because this episode wasn't that good. By most accounts, most people didn't like the episode, including the writers. Apparently, this was written by an intern who wrote several other episodes, and apparently was also wheelchair bound, so they thought he would be perfect, and he volunteered to write this episode because of that, and put his own personal experience into the episode. However, Michael Piller and Ira Stephen Bear thought it completely failed, and they totally hated his draft, and so they wouldn't even let him write a second draft, which is unusual, and so they turned it over to someone else to write, and they didn't like that draft as well. They also thought that was awful, so then Michael Piller and another writer did it themselves, which is unusual for Michael Piller to just, screw this, I'll do it myself. Usually he just does uncredited rewrites, but this time he put his name on it, and was along with another writer, was the co-writers of the episode. So this episode went through many different drafts, and I think people attached to the show were not that pleased with the final product, and saying it was kind of just a hodgepodge of trying to get it out together, which I can definitely see that. So, to be fair, my opinion of this episode went a little bit up on this most recent viewing, because as I've said before, I always try to be fair when watching these episodes for these reviews. I always try to come at it with fresh eyes and judge it on its own merits and be very analytical. And in the past, I heavily criticized this episode. I said that I hated it and it was boring. I think I considered it one of the 5 worst, or one of the 3 worst episodes of season 2, maybe even top 20 worst of the entire show. But after watching it again, I don't think it's quite that bad. Now, I tried to be fair to this episode because I did a live stream once with my sister, and I mentioned how I really didn't like this episode, and she said she didn't really have a problem with it. She thought it was mediocre, or it was fine, if I remember correctly. And what I said is that I didn't really buy Melora as a character, but then she brought up that she works with a lot of disabled people, and she said their sort of attitude and the way that they behave is struck really true and really realistic. But my counter to that was, well, were any of these people in Starfleet? Now, to be fair, I did try to keep that in mind when watching this episode this time, and I could see the realism in her character. I had a roommate once who was blind, and I always tried never to seem like I was patronizing him or I was being too pitiful and too sympathetic. I tried to treat him like I would treat anyone else, but at the same time, if I saw he needed help, I wanted to be helpful, but I didn't want to cross the line of being, pitying or whatever. And I think, well, at least his attitude, he seemed to appreciate any help. In fact, sometimes he would outright ask for it. One time I went out and saw a movie with him and another roommate, and he asked the other roommate to, hold his hand because, he's blind in the middle of the city. And he was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that. That's too gay." I'm like, "Are you fucking serious?" So I held his hand, of course, because I'm not dumb like that. But anyway, but the point is, kind of a tangent there, but the point is, I could see his point of view, and I could see him getting frustrated when people sort of treated him like an invalid, which he isn't. And through my brief, very limited experience of my back problems I had last year where I could barely walk, my mother was constantly yelling at me for doing too much. I was constantly picking stuff up or bending over or doing things that I absolutely should not be doing that were killing my back, and she kept yelling at me to stop doing that and ask for help. But I didn't want to ask for help. And part of that is because, well, my mother had her own back issues, so I'd have to ask my dad for help, and he didn't really seem to want to give it. So that's part of the reason why I didn't want to bother him. And I felt very, very upset having to ask him, even when he was willing to give the help. It's not a good feeling. So I can understand this perspective, and so I was listening to many of the dialogue that Melora had, and keeping that in mind, I actually bought it a lot more. I bought her attitude and the way that she would behave, and her sort of, especially considering that she actually isn't disabled. Like, she's normal for her species. It just so happens she wants to travel amongst other species, and to them, in their environment, she's at a disadvantage. It's kind of like if a human were to go to Betazoid. Like, they would not disabled, they just don't have an ability that all the Betazoids have. And so they would seem at a disadvantage, which is an interesting sci-fi concept, and also you can understand her sort of attitude a bit more because of that. But all that being said, I still go back to my original point that she's in Starfleet, and she should be used to this by now, because it seems to me that Bashir and Dax and Sisko have to, just by nature, they have no choice. They have to make exceptions for her. They have to make accommodations for her. That's just the nature of her conditions. Nothing against her, not pitying her or calling her an invalid. It's just reality that they need to put all these ramps in the station, and they need to make certain allotments. And other than that, it seems to me like Sisko and Bashir and everyone are treating her the way they would treat any other ensign, and that she is just being overly sensitive to that. Now, part of me is, again, I can understand why someone in her position would be overly sensitive, but on the other hand, she's an ensign in Starfleet. She should have had to deal with this already. Like, none of this should be new. Like, she should know what standard regulations are. She should know that ensigns can't take runabouts by themselves to the Gamma Quadrant. She should know that senior officers have meetings about her without her being there. That's normal procedure. Like, all these things that she was snapping and bidding, "Oh, you're just treating me like an invalid." Like, because she's in Starfleet, she went to academy, assumably, and served in Starfleet. Like, this isn't her first assignment. She should know all this. She should, and it seems like kind of bad writing from that perspective that they're artificially trying to make her a bit more antagonistic in order to make the episode more exciting and have there be more tension. That's what I get from this episode. But, you know, as I said, like, part of me gets it, like, gets the kind of attitude that she's had, but the other part is she's in Starfleet, and so it seems unrealistic that she would. And it seems to me that Sisko and everyone else are doing their best to treat her like they would treat any other Starfleet ensign, and she's just being unrealistic on how ensigns be treated. In other words, she is asking for special accommodation. And the other thing is the time where she went to get something herself in an area that wasn't prepared for her, and so she fell down, so first of all, she should know better than to try to do something like that. But then again, as I said, I myself, when I had a condition, was constantly doing things I know I shouldn't do, so I can relate to that. But when she fell down, she had her combat. She didn't call Jadzia because she was too proud. Like, what did she think would happen? Like, she knew she couldn't get out of that herself. So, I don't know. Suppose I could kind of buy it, but again, to me, it's too much of a character flaw. But, anywho, so the romance with Bashir, this episode doesn't address how unethical it is for a doctor to be treating or dating his patient. Especially they're in the middle of like these groundbreaking treatments, and how nobody brings up the fact how unethical it is for the two of them to get together. This will be mentioned in the episode, I believe it's pronounced Crusalis, something like that, over in season 7, where they actually, it seems like that episode was like a response to this one, because they actually tackled that head on, how unethical it was for Bashir to be dating his patient. Where here, they just completely ignore it and act like it's perfectly fine when it really shouldn't be. But as for the romance with Bashir and Melora, I didn't really mind like the interaction between them, like the way Bashir was being playful whenever she would say something aggressive. He'd be like, "Oh, red alert!" Like that was I could see the charm. I think this episode is probably the episode where Bashir actually came off as charming and not creepy, because this is a common complaint of Bashir in season 1, that they tried to make him this ladies' man. And then that is the episode in like Q-List where he was hitting on this random Bajoran woman. I don't know if she was a Dabo girl. I don't want to make presumptions, but he was hitting on her by telling her this boring-ass story about how he almost became valedictorian or something, but he missed the question on his exam, and she was, like, captivated by it. To me, that just came off as totally goofy, like, and silly. And then the way he was hitting on Vosh was just, like, cheesy-ass, like, cheese factor. and then the way he was hitting on Jadzia was outright creepy, particularly in the episode Dax, where he offered to walk her home and she said, "No, thank you, I'm fine." And he's like, she didn't say no, but but whatever. And he went to follow her. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Now, that's obviously plot convenience because they wanted him to catch the people trying to abduct Jadzia, but still, comes off as creepy ass. Now, I think this is the first time we see Bashir flirting that actually comes off as charming and not creepy. So I will give this episode that. Like, his stuff about, "Oh, red alert." Like, that, I could see that as being really charming. But, that being said, the way that Melora went from being hostile to them and then wanting to make out with him happened too fast. Now, I'm not saying that it was unrealistic, because there's knowing like cases for real where similar stuff kind of happen. So I don't know if I'd say it's unrealistic, but I would say it's bad storytelling. It's not interesting for someone watching a TV show of fictional characters, which is what we're doing. It's not very interesting for her to simply jump from, yeah, go the fuck away, to, hey, let's make out in low G, like in 2 seconds. I know it wasn't 2 seconds. It's more like two. It was like, it was more than 2 minutes, to be fair. It was probably 2 hours if you go by in universe time, but still, it's too fast. It was maybe 5 minutes of screen time, something like that. Yeah, so I think that didn't work, and I didn't buy. And then not only did they go straight from "fuck you" to "let's make out," they went straight from "let's make out" to asking Dax, "Hey, can we? I want to do this whole romantic thing with him." And that seemed like boom, 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 boom. They're jumping too fast. And that's always the problem with these romance of the week storylines, something I've railed against. That it comes off as more as flings. And I think ultimately, like, I heard the opinion that this came off as kind of a deeper romance, that Bashir was looking at her more of a girlfriend and not a one-night stand, which may be the case, but it's not something I would call deep. It still seemed superficial. Like, for example, if I make comparison to the TNG episode I just covered recently, Lessons, that was a very deep relationship between Picard and Lieutenant Darren, which is why I was so upset that they just dropped it after one episode. Whereas this definitely was not that deep. Although they could have made it into something if they did make her a reoccurring character, if they kept her on the station or had her returned, then they could have made something out of it. But the fact we never see her again means it is just a meaningless fling. And that takes any interest out of it, especially the parts where she's talking to Dax. And plus, I don't know, I just don't like the cliche of the girl talk. When the two science officers are supposed to be working, they're talking about men. And the whole thing, they're asking Dax about long-term relationships, like, that seemed really unearned, especially since they didn't go anywhere with it. I do think that the ending scene at the Klingon restaurant, when the Klingon's like singing and she's like, I want to remember that. That's nice. Like, I reminded me of instances where I had very memorable dates when I was younger, and even though it didn't turn out that well, the relationship didn't really work afterwards, I still remember the dates fondly, so I can relate to that. Like, that was a nice sort of relatable moment. So that moment worked for me. The concept of a Klingon restaurant doesn't work for me, because Klingon... So, Star Trek will often treat aliens as if they're just different ethnicities of humans, but there's a huge difference between that. Like, you can eat Italian food and eat, Japanese food because we're all human beings. But Klingons are an alien with a different biological makeup. What they need to consume may be poisonous, let alone not taste good, to other species like humans and other species that populate Deep Space Nine. In fact, you would think there need to be compensations or different menus for different aliens, because some things might be toxic or poisonous or absolutely disgusting to different aliens with different biological makeups. And it seems like the kind of food that the Klingons eat. I mean, I know the gimmick of the show that it's meant to be disgusting and look disgusting and people are brave for wanting to eat it, but logically, like, they shouldn't be able to eat it. Like, and it just doesn't. And who the hell would want to go to a Klingon restaurant? I know it's like the brave people. It seems like that place would shut down and not get any business. Now, I think we do, if by memory. I think we see it one more time in season 2, but then never again. if I remember correctly. So it probably does. You could say it did shut down for for not getting enough business. They should have stuck around to when Martok and all them come in. Then they would have plenty of business. But anyway, it wouldn't have been so novel. But yeah, the whole Klingon restaurant thing, it's whatever. It's fine. Now, getting into the, I guess to talk about the whole storyline about her treatment, which I don't really have much to say about that. It seemed kind of inconsequential, and it was just kind of thrown in there and unnecessary. And plus, as I said, it made a really sort of negative vibe on the whole romance thing, because why is the doctor dating his patient? But other than that, it was just, I know they tried to make the Little Mermaid analogy, but it seemed like she should have realized right away, like, that this was a trade-off. It seemed like he was didn't properly inform her of the consequences. Now, she did say in a line of dialogue later on that, I understand, what would happen, that doing this treatment would mean I wouldn't be able to use the low gravity less. But it doesn't seem like she did. It seems like she didn't fully grasp that she wouldn't be able to return to her home planet, or if doing so could make it so she can't leave again. I don't know, it just didn't seem like she was really informed. And so when she decided not to do it at the end, I was like, well, of course. It seemed like that made all the sense in the world. I don't know. I don't think this storyline worked. That's what I'm saying. So, then we get the side plot with Quark and the dude who wants to kill him, Fallit Kot. And I'm sorry for the crude joke, but I'm sorry. I laughed hysterically when I heard this joke, so I'll have to say it. Instead of calling him Fallit Kot, I call him Flaccid Cock. I know, it's a juvenile joke. That's a very good analogy for this storyline, because it just goes... It is not interesting at all. It is just such a throwaway. It seems like it's just there to give Quark something to do. It's just the guy shows up and goes like, I'm going to kill you. And Quark's like, here, let me give you all this money and gifts. No, don't kill me. No, I'm still going to kill you. So Quark goes to Odo, is like, he's going to kill me. And Odo's like, okay. And then it's like, don't kill Quark. He's like, well, nothing you can do about it. I'm just walking funny. And he's like, okay. And then he goes and tries to kill Quark. And Quark's like, wait, let me give you all this money. And he's like, okay, give me the money. So they go to get the money, and instead of just taking the money and leaving, or maybe taking the money, killing Quark and leaving, he kills the dude he took the money from, and then tries to run away on the runabout with Quark as a hostage. Why didn't you just take the money? Seriously, either just kill Quark when you had the chance, or take the money. And maybe he wanted the best of both worlds, but in doing so, like, he's an idiot. Trying to still run about is a no-win situation. Once you're in that hostage situation, you're fucked. And they even point this out. Like, Quark even says, like, do you think Starfleet's just going to let you go? And he's like, then we're all going to die. Well, why did you put yourself in that situation in the first place then, you fucking moron? Like, why didn't you just take the money and just go? And I'll tell you why. So the episode could happen. Now, to be fair, at least the two plots meet at the end. That is the best thing I can say about it. They find a way to put these two plots together. But it was just a way to create tension or whatever, to have some stakes in the episode. This is how I can tell this is a poorly written episode, a hodgepodge of different ideas, and they were doing their best to try to save it. I could see them in the writer's room going there's no stakes here. We need to put some stakes. Oh, all right, let's just invent some storyline about some old guy, dude that used to know Quark that he sent to prison that wants to come back and kill him. We can have him take hostages at the end of the episode, I guess. I don't know. That seems pretty obvious to me. And the big complaint complaint I have about this Fallit Kot storyline. I'm sorry, I just find it hilarious. But anyway, the big complaint I have is that Odo's much better than this. This is another thing that's plot convenience, so the episode can happen, is that Odo basically does nothing. Come on. Odo's much better at stopping criminals. And I get he might not really want to help Quark, but he points out that, this is my job. I'll do my job, unfortunately. Like, that's a funny scene, by the way, between Quark and Odo. That's the one good thing about this storyline, is that scene when Quark goes in. He wants to kill me, and Odo just smiles. He says nothing, just a passing thought. Like, that's a good scene. I love the interaction between the two of them. But, point is, if Odo wanted to stop Fallit Kot, he could stop him. And how the fuck does that dude eat? He's got like a bridge thingy in the middle of his nose. But anyway, sorry, that's off topic. By him saying, when the Fallit says, you can't arrest a man for the way he walks. I'm like, but he outright threatened. He's sending death threats, like face-to-face death threats to a regular, resident of the station. Fuck yeah, Odo could throw his ass in jail. Be like, even if he denies it, I didn't do any death threats, me. Like, Odo can tell that's full shit. Have Quark be an eyewitness saying he's doing face-to-face death threats. He's showing up at my place of business and threatening to kill me. Hell yeah, Odo can fucking throw him in jail. Like, again, it doesn't happen because plot convenience. And even if he didn't throw him in jail, he could, do his shape-shifting thingy and follow him around or whatever, instead of just giving Quark a comm badge. What Odo does for Quark is so half-assed. He's terrible at his job in this episode. And I don't think it's because he doesn't like Quark. I think it's because of plot convenience, because they wanted that stupid ending where he takes hostages. Yeah, so that whole thing is dumb. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Nailhouse and Antarius. Thank you so very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Melora, more like smell bora. Oh good, another after-school special on Star Trek. All this needs is a speech by Tasha Yar about how drugs make you feel good. Trek has done some amazing social commentary episodes like Far Beyond the Stars and Endgame. Shut up with your Endgame nonsense, sorry. And basically anything with Vic Fontaine, yada yada. These episodes shaped American culture and changed the way we do things. Mark, you don't know this because you were in New Zealand at the time, but trust me, in those days you couldn't go 10 steps without someone quoting Profit and Lace or that stupid episode of TNG when they turn into kids. It was a big deal back then. Oh, and also that one time Archer said ass. That was a big deal too. I'm sorry, what was the topic again? Oh, Melora. I don't want to talk about Melora. Wake me up when you're doing Dark Frontier so I can hear Mark say, Janeway. Well, I got bad news for you, Kyrie091. I've already done Dark Frontier, sorry to say. But anyway, I wasn't in New Zealand until 2004. And that's, all these episodes came out in the 90s. Well, I did go there for 6 months in 99. But still, it was after Deep Space Nine finished. But anyway, not that, I should really take your comments seriously about people quoting Vic Fontaine and, and whatever. But yeah, or Rascals or Profit and Lace. just naming a lot of really terrible shit to try to get under my skin. But anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, Trek fails once again to provide any sympathy to the disabled or neurodivergent. I guess it's not as bad as The Lost, but it's hard to like Melora. Bashir still comes across as Season 1 Bashir with getting involved with the patient. Granted, he would do this again in Season 7, which by then he should have known better. The only pluses I would give is the Klingon Restaurant and how Melora herself knows Klingon cuisine and culture well. More than Bashir, as well as the character, which unfortunately we only see twice in the entire series. Granted, the restaurant is referred to a lot throughout the series. Oh, is it? I must have missed that part of it. The B story does get a tie with the A story at least, and creates for all of us a shock that Melora may have been killed. So I give them bonus points for that, as fake-outs like that with non-main characters are rare, let alone with one-offs. But if Melora was the original character planned, I think she would have needed some type of growth, other aspects immediately, otherwise she unfortunately would have brought the series down. Dare I mention Seth MacFarlane, but he did have a Melora-like character in his series and showed it could have worked. Well, sort of, if the actress didn't leave and immediately get replaced with another one of her same species. But looking at this show alone, Melora is right there with Troy in The Lost, being unlikable, only at least not exactly as a superpower. As for trying to look at flying in the air as an interesting aspect of what she'd like to do, I was at a conference where Alexander Siddig rolled his eyes when he brought up this episode, saying that metaphor was a bit too much. He also is contemptuous on how his character was written in this episode, especially since the whole picture, his genetic enhanced retcon later in the series made him look bad at making him look back at this episode and said, wow, this episode could have been much more, as Bashir had a hidden disability. But when the actor and not even the writers can foresee the retcon, the episode is what it is, with the lousy romance of the week for Bashir, who outside of idealism of the new Starfleet doctor is still arrogant and thinks with his pants with his patients. 2 Klingon squirmy cuisines out of 10. Yeah, I gotta be honest. I also agree that this episode also was not a very good portrayal of disabilities. A Lot of the Whisper is a good example, I think. But The Lost was much worse. I will be fair to this episode in that regard. At least, as I said, I can somewhat buy her aggressive demeanor. I think they go overboard with it because she's a fucking Starfleet ensign and should realize how Starfleet works. But parts of her not wanting to be pitied or whatever I can buy. Troy's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I already went through all the reasons why, because she had a superpower, an ability that everyone else didn't have, and she's acting all aristocratic and privileged by being a total asshole to everyone around her who just wanted to help her. So that episode was fucking infuriating, and I would say way worse than this one, but this one also did not handle the topic particularly well either, just nowhere near as bad. That is very interesting hearing what Alexander Siddig has to say about this episode, and I think it makes total sense to me that he doesn't really like it and like what they did to his character. I do think it's unrealistic of him, though, to hold it against him for not knowing about the genetically engineered, because that was a retcon that happened late in the show, and it was a terrible retcon that never should have happened. So trying to input that dumbass retcon into early parts of the show where they very obviously didn't think of that is kind of a useless exercise. But it's still interesting to hear what he said about it. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, I believe I said in the Lost comment that Melora was an episode where I think they also failed in sympathy for the disabled, and after watching it I completely stand by it, although this is nowhere near as bad or as irritating as The Lost. But I do think this is one of the more of lesser quality episodes of season 2, and to be honest, I was so bored with it and I just couldn't wait for it to be over. I think I heard that this character was supposed to be part of the main cast, but it didn't work out. I don't think she would have fit in the show, to be honest, and I didn't really like this character either. I thought she was being too aggressive about her disability, and the Bashir and Melora relationship, I did buy it, but I didn't care. It wasn't a relationship like Lessons or The Inner Light, where I was emotionally invested and cared about it. So yeah, I didn't really like it, so my rating is a 4 out of 10. Totally fair. I feel the same way about the romance. I bought it, but I didn't really care about it. It just wasn't that interesting. And yes, also of course agree about The Lost. Is definitely worse, but this episode also doesn't handle the topic very well. Next comment is from Antarius, who says, the scene at the Klingon restaurant was really funny, but otherwise this episode was so boring. It's such a typical romance of the week story with no or very little interesting aspects. The Quark storyline didn't save the episode and was almost as boring. My rating is a 3 out of 10. I would actually, I think you're the second Patreon supporter to say that the B story was just as bad or worse than the A story, or just as bad or better. I would say that the B story, the Quark storyline, was clearly worse than the Melora storyline. As much issues as I have with the Melora storyline, I think the Quark storyline was just a total dud. The only good thing about it was the Odo and Quark scene. Other than that, it was just, I'm gonna kill you. Oh, here's some gifts. I'm still gonna kill you. It's just pointless, and it was half-assed. But anyway, it was just there to create the thread of the week, which I fucking hate. You know me, I fucking hate it when I do that. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Season 3 of Star Trek Dumbest Criminals is here with Fallit Kot. He could have easily taken the 199 bars of gold-pressed latinum and left the station, but instead decided to kill Don Stark and steals a runabout with no plan when he arrives at Quark's bar. Fallit, that's right, I've come to kill you, Quark. Doesn't do anything for about 2 days, and when he does, he should have taken the money and left. Instead, he's going to prison for life for killing Bob from that 70s show. Oh, that's Bob from that 70s show? Or is it just someone who looks like him? I don't fucking know. I don't even know who that is. The only part of the other story is Alexander Siddig acting. He is improving. Melora Pazlar drops her guard too late, I would toss her out of her nearest airlock for being rude and a complete asshole. She was awful to Dax, and if she wasn't an arrogant person, she could have learned a lot from Dax, as she is 300 years old with experience. So my rating is 4. I wondered, did the Klingon who served Bashir wash his hands out of 10? I'm going to say no. I do not think that Klingon washes his hand. He just grabs it in the food and goes, and it's just like when Melora gave him that food that she didn't like, he just tosses it on the floor. I think he's very unsanitary, personally. But it's a gimmick, though. Look at how dirty the Klingons are. They're grabbing stuff with their hands. Oh, what a gimmick. But anyway, completely agree about Fallit Kot. Sorry. I completely agree about him. Yeah, he's an idiot. It's so dumb. It's so plot convenience. Just take the money and run, as they say. But yeah, I don't know. I think you're being a little unfair to Melora, but I can totally get that. But to be fair to her, she did warm up to Dax in that girl talk scene. Even though it was fucking dumb. Anyway, so final comment is from Brandon Neil Howells, who says, Melora was supposed to be an ongoing science officer character, but the whole different gravity problem was too expensive. Haha. First thing I must ask is how the Federation defines disabled. Surely they have dealt with species who live in different gravities before. As a person who uses a wheelchair to get around, this episode really makes me angry. The last thing any disabled person wants to be is told that they are extraordinary, especially by a doctor who has a crush on them. I am assuming Melora has a comm badge. Why doesn't she call for help after she falls? I wear a pendant around my neck, which I press if I need assistance or can shout, Alexa, help. Mark, do you remember the time a few years ago when I fell to the floor on the day of one of your live streams and I had to wait 3 hours for people with the correct equipment to get me off the floor and onto my bed? For the majority of my life, I have let my disability define me, and I have not made it public knowledge because I feel ashamed of it. About 5 years ago, I realized that it did not matter nearly as much until watching things like this episode. I have heard it said that Melora is too abrasive. A disabled viewer said so. I cannot be unbiased about this because I am probably the same way. One of the podcasts I listened to asked why Melora could not have her low grav room in a holosuite. The holosuites are upstairs, people, just in case no one noticed. Bashir is astonished by low gravity. What the actual fuck? You are in space, you bloody fool. Does no one do EVA training anymore? This is the same Bashir who complains about the color of the carpet on the new Defiant. I am troubled that Bashir would think that Melora would want to be healed, in quotations, which would in fact make her an exile from her own planet, and that such medical procedures need to be done with Melora while Melora is naked. Also, Melora and Julian having a sexual relationship seems to be a conflict of interest. I will mention this again when we get to Chrysalis. As for Dax and Melora and the runabout asking if romance in Starfleet works, that is just boring girl talk. Yawn. The Quark plot is too silly to even comment on. It has always seemed to me that Starfleet and the Federation in general seems to do poorly in its representation of disabled people. Yes, there is Geordi LaForge, of course. He has no chips on his shoulder, but has an android as his closest friend and cannot seem to score a check outside of the holodeck. A person in the wheelchair could not even get off the transporter pad, let alone go anywhere else except the bridge of the Enterprise D. But I'm not in Starfleet. 4 Klingon chefs out of 10. I've used a fancier wheelchair than that. Yeah, what is up with that wheelchair? I've heard other people comment on the prop of the wheelchair and how rank it looks even by today's standards. The prop department didn't really do a good job with that one. But no, thank you, Brandon, for your comment. It's very interesting to hear your unique perspective on this episode and how it still doesn't work for you. And you also agree that Star Trek doesn't always do a good job when it tackles the topic of disability. Now, one point you make that's a really good point is that Bashir, and I didn't think about this, but as soon as you brought it up, I'm like, oh yeah, like when Bashir is acting all amazed, oh my god, this is like flying. It's like, you work in space. And the other parts of Star Trek episodes have mentioned that is requirement to do EVA training, like low gravity training in Starfleet at the Academy. And granted, he's a doctor, so maybe he didn't go to the Academy exactly, but he still is a Starfleet officer who works in space. It still seems like the kind of EVA training should be required. And he should be at least familiar. Like, what if the gravity plating or whatever the fuck they use? I think gravity plating is Enterprise. I think this one's inertial dampers. But whatever the fuck it is. What if the magical imaginary fantasy device goes out and you lose gravity? What fucking then? You're going, oh, whoa! I guess that's kind of how the Klingons in Star Trek 6 were acting, for that matter. But anyway, like, no one in the fucking 24th or 23rd century knows how to deal with no gravity in space. Whatever. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so very much for your comments. So, my rating for Melora out of 10 is going to be a 4 poor. I was kind of torn between a 4 and a 5, but the more I think about it, the more I want to go to a 4. I think a 5 is a little bit too generous to this episode. It's not, as I said, it's not as bad as I remember, so I'm not going to give it like a 2 or anything like that, because I do think there are aspects of it that work. As I say, I understand Melora's perspective and her demeanor a bit more, and but I think they went overboard with it to the point is she's a Starfleet officer, so she should know how Starfleet works. And the Bashir romance was okay. Like, as I said, he was kind of charming in this episode. There were some lovely scenes, like the final scene at the restaurant, and I could buy the romance, but it was kind of boring, and I didn't really care about it, especially since we never see this character ever again, so it's just a fling, so who the fuck cares? And it particularly made that scene when she was talking to Dax about relationships in Starfleet meaningless, because this relationship goes nowhere anyway, so what's the fucking point of that scene? And also, I don't buy that she would go be thinking about long-term relationships that quickly anyway. It just wasn't planned out very well. But that whole sequence at the end with Fallit Kot, I'm sorry, I just need to say that one more time. But the whole sequence at the end with that was really dumb. It was just, let's have some tension. Oh, we need to have a threat, so let's have this useless B-plot with this dude going around saying he's going to kill Quark and not really do anything with it. And let's have Odo suck at his fucking job because it's convenient for the plot. So to me, that's really what brings the episode down to a 4, is that whole thing. But yeah, the Melora storyline I think is better, but it's still not that good either. So, 4 from me. So that is it for my review of Melora. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like, a comment, all that kind of thing. Really helps out with the channel a lot. If you would really like to support my channel, you can support me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Different tiers for different people and different rewards for different tiers. Like, we have a Patreon only series where I revisit reviews of Star Trek episodes that I already reviewed. I do pre-releases. You can request a video for me to do. All sorts of fun stuff. You can check that out in the link below if you are so inclined. Alright, so let's see what's coming up next with my channel. Let's see. So Wednesday will be my review for Dark Page. Thursday, Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 5, Episode 4. And Saturday will be my review for Attached, sticking with TNG. And then next Monday, back to DS9 with my review for Rules of Acquisition. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.